It's the Black Real Estate Dialogue. Tune in. Tune in. Tune in. Tune in.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Black Real Estate Dialogue podcast. Before we get into this episode, a quick announcement. If you have not already, please be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening to this at. It helps us go up in the rankings. It helps us to reach more people and spread this important message all over the world. If you do leave us a 5-star rating and review, I'll read it live on the show for all the listeners. So I look forward to hearing from you. Very excited about this episode. Here with me today, I have Niyi Adewole from Atlanta. Niyi, thank you so much for taking some time to jump on the show today.
Sam, I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this all week. Thank you for having me, man.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's jump right into it. How did you get started in real estate? And before we get into that, tell us a little more about who you are and what you do.
Man, so who I am, I was first generation Nigerian born in the US. I actually was born in Nashville, Tennessee, but I've lived all over the US. I went to high school and college at Temple University, and I had, the opportunity and the blessing to actually play football at Temple University and kind of get, school paid for, which was amazing. For the past 7 years, I've worked for a Fortune 500 healthcare company and been able to move up through the ranks. And at an early age in college, I read a couple books, such as Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and Think and Grow Rich, and Richest Man in Babylon. And it really ingrained some lessons in my head that, hey, it's great that you can have, a good corporate job and things of that nature. You can climb the ladder, but you always need to be investing your money so that it's not tied to, the hours that you're working. And so to answer your first question, when I first joined the company that I was with, I started investing in real estate alongside that. Now, those books that I read did not actually teach me how to invest in real estate, but thankfully, quickly after, I stumbled across the Bigger Pockets podcast, which, Sam, are you familiar with Bigger Pockets? I'm sure you
Oh,
are.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. So I went down the rabbit hole of Bigger Pockets, and it kind of taught me about these terms like house hack. And so, the first property I bought was actually in 2016, and I scraped together every penny I had to put a $5,000 down payment on a $190,000 triplex, right? And I house hacked it. I lived in one unit, rented the other two out, and essentially was living for free. But that's kind of how I got started, and I haven't stopped since 2016.
Love it, love it. So I was going to ask you about that first. Okay, just my research and information provided, I did see that it was a house hack. So as a beginner, well, for those, perhaps somebody's listening to this podcast for the first time, can you explain what house hacking is?
Absolutely. So for most people, your largest expense, if you were to break it out into like a pie chart, is housing. Like housing, 9 times out of 10 is going to be your largest expense. The next largest expense might be, a car payment or something of that nature. And so when you look to save money, a lot of the gurus out there will tell you, hey, you need to cut off your Starbucks or you need to stop, spending and eating out. But when you look at how much you spend eating out or on Starbucks versus your monthly rent, it really pales in comparison. And so that's one of the things that I learned along the way from the reading and the podcasts and things of that nature. And so what a house hack is it's flipping your largest monthly expense into potential income for you. And so the way that it worked for me is prior to doing that house hack, I was living large in Louisville. All right, this is 2016. It's not very expensive down there, as you can imagine. And so I was paying $1,100 a month to live in this amazing loft. I had 2 beds, 2 baths, didn't even need all that. I had a pool right outside. It was the ultimate bachelor crib. It was amazing. And I just had a turn apart after listening and kind of reading and understanding like, hey, I could have my money working for me while I sleep. And so I started doing research and looking at properties. And I found a triplex that was renting for roughly 2,200. And one of the tenants was getting ready to move out. And so I put an offer in the triplex. I was able to get it under contract for 190. And when I moved into one of the units, I went from effectively paying 1,100 a month for rent to having a mortgage of 1,350. But the kicker was that the other 2 units were renting for 1,400. And so I essentially was pocketing 1,100 or really 1,150 in every single month. And it allowed me to start saving for the next house even quicker because I had eliminated my housing expense and I essentially gave myself an $1,100 raise. So that's a house hack.
Love it. And couple things. So you mentioned you were paying 1,100 for the loft, and you moved into this property with a 1350 mortgage, I believe, and you ended up cash flowing 1,100 or so. I want that to sink in for some people. Basically, what you were paying, now you were making, and you literally didn't have a housing expense. And I want people to understand like how quickly that can accelerate your growth. And I'm sure it did. We'll definitely get into it. But I want people to really pay close attention to those numbers because I'm sure after that was a snowball.
Absolutely. And it's huge. And I'm happy that you highlighted that, Sam. And one thing that I don't want people to miss, right? People may say, well, actually, you're making zero, right? There's not the cash flow on top, but you really got to look at saving money as a win as well. I'm a realtor in the Atlanta area. And when I work with some clients that know about house hack, sometimes they're trying to hit like a major home run. They're trying to go like, hey, I want to, completely cover my expense and make $500 from a house hack. I'm like, guys, you're currently paying 2 grand a month in rent. If we were able to reduce that to 1,500 a month, that's a win. So yeah, to your point, Sam, reducing that monthly cost from 1,100 to effectively zero was a major win, and it allowed me to save up to buy the next and the next and the next, and really grow a strong portfolio in Louisville and other cities.
Definitely, definitely. So before we go further, tell us about the Louisville, Kentucky market. I believe you only had one other guest who invests in the market, the Petways, who you may know. So tell us about the Louisville market and what's going on there. 'Cause I know you grew your portfolio quite a bit out there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And in full transparency, I did not even know where Louisville was when they first gave me the news, like, hey, you're going to Louisville. I was thinking Louisiana. I was like, all right, let me find this on the map. Am I going to Louisiana? And then I saw it was in Kentucky, and I was like, guys, where are you sending me? Right. but it was a blessing in disguise because Louisville, Kentucky is one of those Midwestern cities that a lot of people fly over or drive through and don't really know about, but it's on the cusp of Chicago, 6 hours away, 3.5 hour drive from Nashville, a lot less cost than a Nashville or Chicago. And so a lot of people are starting to settle in Louisville, and you're seeing the values go up. And so when I got there, it was just an opportunity to get started in investing at a lower risk. I currently live in Atlanta. You live on the West Coast. If you want to start investing in these two areas, you got to come with a significant down payment. In Louisville, I was able to scrape together just 5 grand to get started. And that kind of made me feel comfortable understanding, hey, if I completely mess this thing up, I can still recover over time. And so the Louisville market's been growing every time I go there, which is pretty consistently. It is just, man, new things downtown. I've consistently invested in there over the past 6 years. And now I'm actually working on a development deal, partnering with my realtor out there. And we're going to develop about 105 townhome units over the next 2 years. And so I believe in the market. I love where it's located. And I think a lot more people are moving to that area because now you do have that remote work option. And so a town like Louisville is prime for those who are like, hey, where can I get the most bang for my buck? Still be close to some of the major cities, just an hour flight from Chicago, short drive to Nashville, and kind of go from there.
Definitely, definitely. And one thing you mentioned within that I want people to, I think there's a lesson in there. You said one of those Midwestern cities people fly over. That often is where the greatest opportunity is because if you get into a market before it's popular, you won. You won, in my opinion. Because think about it, right? Like all these forums and all these things, you never hear anybody talk about Louisville. There's certain cities you never hear anybody talk about. There could be plenty of opportunity there. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah, and to your point, Sam, I think it's riches in the niches. And when you look at some of these large companies that are buying up all the real estate deals, or those that are trying to target these major cities, sometimes you just got to look in your backyard. And that was a major benefit of living there. I got to walk the streets and see like, hey, this is an area that people want to be in. Let me start buying here. And it even helped me when I moved away from Louisville because I only lived there for about a year and a half. But when I moved away, I had walked those streets, run them, and understood the neighborhoods to where I was able to continue buying with confidence because I knew that block.
Definitely, definitely. So you got the first house hack. you settle in, you're a new landlord. Where did things go from there?
Man, so I would like to say it was been all roses and sunshine, but you definitely learn a lot as a new landlord. You learn that, hey, I need to have processes for everything. You learn that you really need to screen tenants, and you learn one lesson that it's better to keep a unit empty than to get the wrong tenant in there. And so I went through many trials and tribulations with my first property. That being said, if it wasn't for that first property and the lessons learned there, I would not be where I am today or have been able to continue expanding the portfolio. And so I bought that first property. I only ended up living in it for about 6 months before I got a promotion at work and was moved up to the New England area to go into a medical device role. Now, up until that point, I was still self-managing. I used systems such as Buildium to kind of manage my tenants. And thankfully, over time, I was able to get out the tenants that were there before I got there, update the units, rip out carpet, put in luxury vinyl plank, do some siding. There was one time where there was a roof leak and it was like, man, this is just a lot of money out of pocket. Those early days, I want to encourage your listeners. In those early days, do not get discouraged. Okay. I've come full circle. I actually ended up selling that first property late last year. And if you remember, I bought it for 190. I was able to sell it for 310, right? So I walked away with a six-figure check. And when I was first, managing it, it was bringing in about 2,200 a month. When I sold it, it was 2,850 in just a short 5 years. And so don't let those early days get you discouraged. Just keep your mind and vision on the long-term goal and keep investing. And so when I got to Boston, I was in medical device sales and I really had to focus in on that. But I was managing a couple of units and I started to have success up there and close some deals. And I took 90% of any commission I got and I put it back into real estate and started growing. The next deal I bought was a 12 unit that was literally, if you were looking for standing on the porch of my front house, you could see the 12 units right there on the corner. So I purchased those and this was one that needed some work, right? I got 12 units for 500K. And the reason I got it for 500K is because there was major bed bug issues. There was a lot of tenants that weren't paying. The structure was questionable and the roofs and gutters needed to get replaced. So needless to say, it was a project that took a long time to turn, but it was significantly worth it because once we did get it turned, the cash flow went through the roof. And this is a deal that I actually just sold earlier this year to, again, focus on this development project and put more money into that. But I bought it for 500K and was able to sell that deal earlier this year for a little over 670, just a couple years later. And so just zooming out, I was able to build the portfolio in Louisville up to 25 units before even thinking about selling any. And the only reason I sold some earlier this year and late last year is to put more money into development deals right on the edge of Louisville.
Wow. A lot to unpack there. So you basically 4x'd on your next deal, which I didn't expect to hear. So tell us about that. Like what between when you got the first property and when you got the 12 unit, how many years have passed in between there?
It was roughly a year and a half. So I got the first house in December of 2016, and I got the 12 unit under contract July 4th, actually, of 2018. And the reason I felt comfortable going after that is one, it was right in the neighborhood that I had walked constantly. Like I knew the houses. I'd been losing out on houses previous to that. I was bidding, losing. And when this one popped on market, I had my investor-friendly realtor down there, who's now my partner, go in, do a video recording. And I was like, hey, we need to put an offer ASAP. And thankfully, it was July 4th. So most people were out celebrating and doing other things. And I was trying to buy real estate. And so this one really tried me and stretched me to the limit. And as you can imagine, working a full-time W-2 and then trying to manage full rehab projects 1,000 miles away and trying to get new tenants onto a system when they were used to writing in checks and there was Section 8 payments coming and all this stuff, it pushed me to the brink to where I really had to actually seek help. And I went and got property management in Louisville to help me. Now, I'll tell you that the first time I got the property management, the first people I chose, they were not the best. And I can give you a story to attest to that. When I left them about a year later, when I left that first property management company about a year later, Typically, security deposits are supposed to be held completely separate, right? They're supposed to be completely separate, not touched. They were unable to locate the security deposits for all our tenants, about 15K or so, for 3 months, multiple emails, multiple messages. And then I finally had to get in touch with my lawyers out there, and they sent a letterhead, and then all of a sudden the money was discovered. But there was some fishy stuff going on there. There was a lot of tenants that would hit me up that had my number from before, like, hey, what's going on? I've reached out to, your property manager for this maintenance issue, and I haven't heard for 2 weeks. And so it was stressful, to say the least. I don't think I made any money that year because it all went to trying to like figure this stuff out, at least from real estate. And, thankfully, the second people I chose, which happened to be right when the pandemic set in, right around March, were much, much better. And those are the same people I use today.
Got it. Got it. So help me to wrap my head around this. So you had mentioned that you purchased this 12 unit. Now, going from 3 to 12, plus you're thousands of miles away, how did you even approach the process of like rehabbing it and all that stuff? Like how did you do it?
Sam, that's an amazing question. And this is where it helps to have a team in place, right? I did not have the full team bought out, but when I lived there, I did have somebody that was doing the lawns. I had a maintenance guy that I trusted that could come in and do, handyman fixes. And I had a couple contractors that I'd use for roofs, gutters, et cetera, that I could call on. And so when it came to this property, first there were some structural concerns, roof, and then gutters. And so I leaned heavily on the contacts I'd made when I was, fixing up my triplex, and also on my investor-friendly realtor. It helps to have someone that is in the industry that also is investing in the same neighborhood. She literally had just renovated a couple houses like 2 blocks away, and she's been buying up everything out there. And so I leaned heavy into her contacts when we had structural concerns. I was like, hey, who do you got? We got a couple bids. They came out there and did it. And I leaned heavy into her as far as working out ways like, hey, would you mind being the showing agent for these units? Because I know they don't show well right now. We need somebody that can sell them. And so for that first, 6 months when I was still managing it, she was my person. I would put together nice flyers. I'd have contractors going in to do work, and she was the person going in and re-verifying, and I'd pay her, obviously. And then, the leasing fees for her. Now, at a certain point, she started to truly take off in her real estate career and could not do that anymore. But thankfully, at that time, I had found property management. Again, the first year was not good, but it was still better than me trying to do that while trying to close deals up in New England. And then the second year, which was pandemic year, of 2020, we were able to move with a much better property management company that has continued to elevate the class of tenant that we have within our units.
Love it. Love it. And another question I have about, the small multi-units, or 3 units versus 12 units. And, for the listeners who may be wondering this, what are some of the main differences you observed in management in just every aspect of, 3 versus 12 units?
The main piece, well, a couple pieces. One, lending, right? And this plays into why I sold it earlier this year as well. So from a lending perspective, when you buy 4 units or less, it's considered a conventional loan. And so you can put 20% down, sometimes 15% down, depending on your credit, and you can have a 30-year loan with a pretty good interest rate, right? Historically speaking. When you get above 5 units, which this was, you've got to go over to the commercial space. And so this was my first forte into commercial. And some of the lending options, I had to do some research to say, hey, man, are you guys like trying to pull one over on me? But what I ended up with was a 5-year arm that was a 5-year fixed rate that was amortized over 20 years. And so if you were running your numbers like a normal, conventional loan and thinking, okay, let me run this over 30 years and hey, my mortgage payment's going to be $3,000. When you shorten that time period of amortization to 20 years, your mortgage payment's going to be like 4,500 or $4,000, right? And so that makes a major difference in your numbers. And that was a piece that, was a little bit of a learning curve. Like, okay, over 20 years. And what happens at the 5-year mark? Hey, we adjust according to the market. And so looking at how the interest rates were hitting this year, it was a no-brainer to say, hey, before these interest rates go up and all of a sudden my 5% loan turns into an 8% loan. Let us get this thing off the books, get it sold while people are still fighting for it. But that was one of the learning curves. The other major learning curve was just how quickly you're going to spend to try to renovate all these units, right? It's better to try to do one unit at a time and keep the tenants as opposed to doing it all at once if you're not taking it vacant. And so we tried to do a lot at once, and quickly money was just flowing out, flowing out, flowing out. And then we had to take a pause, and all of a sudden now you're getting, the same class of tenant in, and then you got to wait a whole nother year before you can do something with that property. And so I'd recommend taking a slow and steady approach. And as tenants, leases come up, focus on that unit, get it up and running, get the right tenant that you want in there, and then move on to the next. The one other learning is one bad apple can spoil the bunch, right? So if you have a couple bad tenants in a shared area, it starts to affect even the good ones. And so there was sometimes where we were able to get one good person in, or two good people in, or three of the tenants that we wanted in, but because of just the surrounding other tenants that were kind of left over, breaking the lease, doing other things, it started to affect them to the point where we had to give concessions to keep them to stay. And it took us a little longer to get it fully turned over.
Got it. Got it. Appreciate that breakdown. A couple of things. So for those who may not be familiar, can you define ARM and also amortization?
Yes, absolutely. So ARM is adjustable rate mortgage. And if you've ever thought about getting a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, or anything like that, these things are tied to a market indicator. And basically, when you hear the news and they say, hey, the Fed just raised, interest rates 0.75, that is part of that market indicator. And so I'll give you a firm example. I actually have a HELOC on my personal house right now that I use to invest in flip deals where it's a defined period of time. I got that HELOC in December. That HELOC, when I got it, was 5%, but it adjusts every month with wherever, the prime rate is. And so since December, it's adjusted from 5%. I think the last notice I got is now it's 7% because the Fed has raised the rates, et cetera. So that's kind of what the ARM is. It adjusts to the market. And then the other term was
amortization.
Thank you. Amortization is your payment schedule. And so that's how they break your payments up for your mortgage. So typically, if you're doing a conventional loan, you're going to have 30 years or 360 months to pay it off. And so they'll break it up evenly, and it includes your principal, interest, payment. If you have an amortization schedule of 20, it's significantly less time to pay all of this, and you have a higher payment. So that's essentially what it means.
Got it. Appreciate that breakdown. So where did you go from there? Did you continue to invest in Louisville after that 12 unit? Where did things go from there? And I'm assuming you still were long distance at this time, right?
I was, and I did continue to invest in Louisville, especially when the pandemic hit, actually. So that 12 unit was purchased in 2018. I believe I purchased one duplex in 2019, and then 2020, when the world kind of shut down, I saw that as a buying opportunity as well, and I jumped in and bought, two more small multi units. And this whole time, I forgot to mention, while I was in Boston as well, I was still house hacking. Right when I first moved up there, the cost of living from Louisville to Boston is roughly a 40% increase. It's crazy. And so I actually took a major pay cut because my base didn't change all that much by moving up there, but the opportunity to get into medical device sales, potentially close some deals, was great enough. And thankfully, I was able to be successful with the team up there. And so when I first got up there, I went from paying $1,100 a month to live in a dope place to, hey, I'm living for free, to paying $1,500 a month to live with two roommates in a semi-renovated place, because that was the best we could do, right? If I wanted to pay $2,000 to live on my own in a studio, the studio would have had 1950 appliances. It would have been in the basement somewhere. It is expensive to live in Boston. And so I did that for about a year and a half until I was able to locate a condo opportunity. And I purchased a condo. First time I ever did that. I'm usually kind of against it, but I purchased a condo up in Boston because that was all that made sense, for $440,000. And this was a 3-bed, 2-bath, and the mortgage was roughly $2,200. And I was able to rent out one of the other rooms to one roommate instead of two for $1,200. And so now I reduced my cost of living from $1,500 in Boston to $1,000. I quote unquote own the place, and I have a little more room as opposed to two roommates. So it was moving on up. But from there, I actually got another promotion and was able to move from Boston down to Atlanta to an ideal situation. And having had family in Atlanta and visited here multiple times, I knew I wanted to do one, again, house hack, and two, I wanted to try something called a luxury house hack. I was looking for a spot where I could really, stay for a good amount of time if I wanted to. And so I have a lot of friends that have been doing short-term rentals in the past, and they'd always encourage me, like, "Nee, you got to jump in this, jump in this." But I was always long-term rental. It's a lot less risky. I can just pass that off to property management. Don't got to think about it as much. But moving down here, I was like, you know what? Let me try it. And so I bought a single family with an in-law suite in an amazing area of town. And the previous owners were using that in-law suite for like an exercise room. And when I looked at this, I was like, you know what? All you got to do is block this wall and add a kitchenette. And this could essentially be a long-term rental or an Airbnb. And so because I was bringing some furniture from Boston, I was like, you know what? Let me try this Airbnb thing. And so I started that one bedroom, one bath in-law suite on Airbnb. And my goal was to make about $1,500 per month. Reason I chose that number is I saw that you could long-term rent this home for that one bed, one bath, and that would be enough to make me comfortable paying the mortgage. The mortgage was roughly $3,700, and with $1,500, I'd be putting down 22, and 22 is roughly what I should have paid at Boston, but I got some increases in pay. I was like, you know what, that makes sense. I'm good with that. And so it has outpaced my wildest dreams. That one bed, one bath, on average, has done $2,500 a month, and the best month being $3,200. One bed, one bath. So when I saw these numbers from April to August, I said, you know what? I got to get another property. And so I went and bought another one about 3 blocks away in Atlanta as well, and rented out the whole home. And that house on average has been doing between $3,000 and $6,300 a month. It's a 3-bed, 2-bath, not even a huge home. It's a bungalow, but people just love to stay in it. And so that kind of kicked off the short-term rental career. But the one thing I want everybody to take away from this is I've been house hacking since 2016. So it works. It helps reduce your cost of living, allows you to get in amazing neighborhoods. And I highly recommend for anybody that is willing to make that slight sacrifice.
Definitely. So, Nee, there's something I'm picking up. I'm picking up that you are one very determined guy. Obviously, continually getting promotions on the job, so that's says something about you. And two, you're just determined to make a way. So in Boston, you were having a couple roommates. You're like, you know what? If I can find an opportunity, let me do the same thing. But now I'm the owner, and now my living expenses are being reduced a bit, and I got something to show for it. And then pretty much repeating the same thing in Atlanta. And I'm pretty sure by the time you got to Atlanta, you probably could have managed and had the home, paid the mortgage. But what makes you want to continually, house hack, continually, make that sacrifice? Some might call
Man, it's what I really think about is even growing up, right? Some of the difficulties that my family had with finances. And even to the point where, when '08 happened, my family was bankrupt. This was when I was in middle school, high school, and we couldn't get loans. We couldn't sign for apartments, anything like that. So we had a lot of moving around and transition during that time period. And so I think it was ingrained at an early age that you have to be able to be financially free or be working toward that. And whatever that means for you, right? Whether that means that you're able to, take a couple weeks off a year, or whether that means that you're able to, kind of take care of any rainy days or anything that may pop up. And so I've always wanted to move toward financial freedom and toward wealth. And the way that I define wealth, because there's many definitions, is if you were to stop working today, stop working your W-2, right? Stop working any job, how long would you last? And it's a simple calculation, right? If your monthly expenses are $2,000 a month and you have, 20 grand in the bank, you can last 10 months, right? But if your monthly expenses are significantly reduced because you're doing a house hack and now you only have to pay 1,000, right, a month, as opposed to 2 grand a month, now that 10 months turns into 20 months and maybe even longer if you keep investing and keep re-upping and re-upping. And so, from between life experiences at a young age, some of those books that, read that started down this path, and also just thinking through the definition of wealth and what I want for my family in the future, that's kind of what motivates me to say, hey, how can I limit some of these expenses? And honestly, this is much better than living with 2 roommates or 1 roommate. So we'll take it, man. I'm like, hey, this ain't bad. This is like a separate.
Definitely. Definitely.
Are you looking for a community of like-minded individuals and access to experts in real estate?
Yeah.
Are you interested in real estate but need more support and guidance?
You know who it is?
The Black Real Estate Dialogue presents the Real Estate Investing Community. No matter how much or how little real estate experience you have, we've created a community for you because your perspective is important. All right, tell me, where's the #1 place where you can do Q&A with experienced guest speakers 2 times per month? How about unlimited access to past guest speakers' recordings? What about a private Slack channel to engage in daily discussion with everybody in the community to share resources and support each other? Head on over to blackrealestatedialogue.com. That's blackrealestatedialogue.com. It's the real estate investing community presented by the Black Real Estate Dialogue. Come join us today.
So there's one thing you mentioned when you were talking about the Airbnb in the current place you're at. You had mentioned that it could make about $1,500 a month, which would be just about equivalent to what you could rent it out for. And I'm really glad you mentioned that. And the reason I'm glad you mentioned that is because a lot of times people like Airbnb is the cool thing right now, right? Like everybody wants to do it. You can make a lot of money. We know this, right? However, there are people who are doing it blindly. They're just either, subleasing an apartment, assuming what it's going to make, getting a property, assuming what it's going to make, but not looking at what they would get if it was rented out, and not understanding that it should work for both scenarios. So tell me more about your perspective on that.
Yeah. So for my first one, being new into it, I just wanted to have a fallback. And so I need to ensure that, hey, if this thing doesn't work out, that's really the reason I even put the kitchenette down there, because you don't need that per se. But I was like, you know what? Let's put a stove down here just in case. And so, especially as a new person getting into it, you don't know what you don't know. You don't even know if you're going to like doing Airbnb. And so you need to make sure that it can work if you have to pivot. Now, having gotten into it and taken my lumps and kind of learn like, okay, this is how you can market your Airbnb. This is what you need to have in an Airbnb. Now I pivoted my strategy a little bit, and I have been purchasing more homes that are just in amazing neighborhoods that may not cash flow from a long-term rental perspective, but it's because I have experience, right? And so, for example, and even before I give the example, I think you should always learn the rules, right? Learn how to play the game, play along with the rules before you break the rules. And the only reason that you should be able to break the rules is because you've learned what they are and understand how you can tweak that and kind of make a deal work for you. And so the second house I bought for an Airbnb, that was a full Airbnb, I bought that house for $460, right? If I were to rent that home long term, it would rent for about $2,500 a month long term. The mortgage on it is $2,700. So I'd be losing money every month if it wasn't on that. That being said, there's also other ways in between Airbnb and a long-term rental to make more. And so there's something called Furnish Finder, which Sam, I'm sure you're aware of, right? And Furnish Finder is basically where travel nurses go to find homes that they can stay in for 3-month assignments. And I was looking at that, and I was like, okay, Furnish Finder looks interesting. Let me list the home on there. And there was immediate interest, right? And on Furnish Finder, on average, you could rent the home out for about $4,000 a month, which would help you at least make a little bit of cash flow and cover all the expenses. Now, with that in my back pocket, I felt comfortable buying this home and making it into an Airbnb with the Furnish Finder as the backup plan. Now, on Airbnb, this home has been renting for between $3,000 and $6,300. And the main benefit of the home, and the reason that I bought it, is because it's an amazing neighborhood where people are trying to move into. And that home, which I bought in August of last year, has appreciated from $460 to $545. right? Now, if I were to list it, I'd probably list it at
Wow.
515, right? With the interest rates going up and get the bidding wars going. But yeah, it's gone up almost 100K. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a house in a neighborhood where everybody wants to be. And the only way to really make that cash flow was through a method other than long-term rental. And so figured that out. And now just plan to hang on to that thing because over time, especially with it getting a little harder for people to obtain a home right now, the rents are going to go up. It may not be there right now, but give it a couple years. That 2,500 is going to turn into $3,000. That $3,000 is going to turn into 3,500. And at a certain point, I may switch it over to a long-term rental.
Definitely. Love it. Love it. And I like what you mentioned because it showed the importance of being able to pivot and having different backup plans. You can do Airbnb, you can do travel nurses, you can even do a long-term rental, even though you'd have to pay 200 bucks. That's still honestly not that bad. And I'm pretty sure with all things considered, it could balance out in the absolute worst case scenario. But I think it's important for people to you need to look at all these factors when you're trying to do short-term rental or anything. Like you got to have multiple ways you can attack it because you just never know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. And it comes back to even having a foundation, right? Throughout all this time, there's been a foundation of saving, right? Of, hey, let me try to save on my home expense, or hey, let me build up some units over here. Let me put some money in Vanguard. Let me build up these units over there. And that's what made me comfortable moving into it. It's not like the first investment I was going into, there was already a solid base. And so even in my mind, if this one, to your point, was doing the 2,500 and kind of minus 200 a month, I knew what I could pull from one of the other investments that was more mature to cover that until we figured it out.
Definitely, definitely. So I got to ask you, especially because you're in Atlanta, you're in the short-term rental scene. Um, different cities. I know Atlanta in particular. There are rumblings. There are rumblings of changes happening and laws and stuff that could limit um, Airbnb in particular cities. So, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on generally speaking, what's going on, and perhaps even what could or may not be coming to Atlanta as far as Airbnb regulations?
Man, you are hitting on a hot topic right now. And so, uh, one of the things that I do as well is I now own 4 Airbnbs. Just purchased one about a week and a half ago that'll be up and running at the end of the month. And I manage for additional owners, which kind of came out of nowhere. We can get into that later. But to answer your question, there's been an ordinance that Atlanta's been trying to pass since March, right? It was supposed to go into effect at the end of March. And it effectively says that if you do not live in Atlanta, you cannot operate an Airbnb. And if you do live in Atlanta, you can only have 2 maximum Airbnbs, right? And so when that news came out that this was going to go into effect, you should have seen all the people that were doing rental arbitrage. I'm in a lot of groups on Facebook, and it's just, man, if you want to go buy some furniture, that's the time. Everybody was like, hey, I'm selling my unit. You can have the furniture. It's cheap. And it really started to weed a lot of people out. And what I would say is, I've been able to get my short-term rental license, and a lot of the owners have as well through some guidance. And this law still is not in effect, right? What Atlanta's trying to do is they're trying to, like many cities, make it easier for a first-time home buyer to obtain a home because it's gotten ridiculous, right? The home value of the median price of a home in Atlanta has gone from 250 to 375 in the last 2 years. And so if you were sitting on the fringe of like right around 300 qualifying, and now the median home's gone to 375, it's difficult for you. And so I understand what the city's trying to do. They're trying to limit how many investors are stealing up all the housing supply so that people that actually want to live in the home can buy it. Now, that being said, this was the first pass. They tried to get it in March. There was a lot of backlash, and so they pushed it back to April and then back to June. And the latest is that it's going to go into effect in September. I actually got an email from Airbnb today saying it's going into effect in September. We will see it about a week and a half if they push it back again. The ordinance, if you just take it at its face value, it could seem pretty strict. That being said, they're still trying to figure it out themselves. There's ways around this thing. I personally only own 2 of them in the city of Atlanta, and the other 2 that I just bought were right on the fringe. When they talk about Atlanta, what they're really talking about is Fulton County. This does not include College Park. It does not include East Point, Hateville, Marietta, Decatur, all the places that you think are Atlanta as well. Those aren't included in the ordinance. So if you wanted to go just outside of that, you can still continue to build up your Airbnb units and be safe. What I believe is really going to happen is some of these rental arbitrage models are going to go out. Some other people are going to get out of the game, and those that are left remaining are going to scoop up all the demand and really have a major benefit because people are still coming to Atlanta, right? 30 of the Fortune 1000 companies are based here. I can tell you Microsoft just put one of their headquarters here. Nike put their tech hub here. Airbnb put their East Coast headquarters here. There's a lot going on for Atlanta. So people are still going to need places to stay and still want to visit this city. It just is going to weed out some of the non-professional hosts. Oh, and one last piece. The reason that they keep pushing it back is because the city of Atlanta wants to find a way to monetize this while limiting it. And up until this point, only 10% of the 7,000 active Airbnbs have registered and been approved with a license. So they're still trying to figure out how to get everybody else approved before coming down with a hammer.
Got it. You think it's a bad idea or a good idea?
For the rental ordinance?
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea, but I think it's a good idea in the sense that they're trying to make housing more affordable for those trying to move here. And they're trying to limit some of the disturbances from the non-professional hosts, because there's a lot of hosts out there that will allow a party house and just say, hey, I'm making money. It doesn't really matter, right? We're not one of those, especially the way that we manage the units. We screen guests like to the extreme to where they're like, hey, some guests don't want to stay because of our screening process, which is fine. And so I like that aspect of it. What I don't like is for those that are professional, for those that are handling their business, what if you already had 4 or 5 Airbnb units? What happens to you? Do you now have to sell your house or kind of completely convert that over to a long-term rental when it's not going to work for you? I would like if they kind of, made it a step approach. Maybe for your first 2, you got to pay $150 licensing fee. And then for your third, fourth, maybe they just look at the history of your previous 2 to see if you had any issues, any cops called, things of that nature, and then charge you extra to get the extra licenses. I would like to see more like that. But again, things could change in this ordinance before it's officially released because there's been a lot of backlash and it keeps getting pushed back. So we'll see.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your perspective. I appreciate that. I personally I think it's ridiculous because, the issue is there's not enough housing. Prices are going up. So that's in my opinion, that's the issue. So why do like the business owners have to be punished because of that? Build more housing, like whatever is holding back the ability to build more housing, then why can't we just do that? I mean, Atlanta's gotten super dense over the last decade or so. I mean, I would assume there's just not enough housing. Would you say there's like a housing shortage in Atlanta?
Absolutely. Like it's
Mhm.
100% agreed. There's people trying to throw up houses now, but it's still not enough. I
Right.
can tell you that there's so many people still moving here, hitting me up and some of my other colleagues up that it's incredible. It's incredible. And from a housing shortage perspective, I mean, even across the US, right? I think from any report that you'll see, they'll say we're anywhere from 3.5 million short to 6 million houses short across the
Right.
US. And so when you look at just the US in general versus like European nations, we've always been, the home ownership model, right? I think
Yeah.
it's like a 65 split between 65 home ownership, 35% renter. Whereas in Europe, it's completely flipped. It's like 70% renter, 30% ownership. And it's because they've been around for so long that those houses are so expensive that it's hard to get into. And I think you're starting to see a shift in the US where we're becoming more of a renter nation. And if you're not looking to get into housing soon, it's going to be almost impossible, right? It's going to get harder and harder, especially in the large metro areas like Atlanta, to even obtain a house that, you're going to be forced to rent if you're not actively looking right now.
Definitely. Definitely. I guess we'll see how things plan out. But glad we got to have a bit of a dialogue about it. So this episode is actually a celebration too. When we first got on, you had mentioned that you've put your 2 weeks in, and you're taking the full plunge into being a full-time investor, realtor, and business owner. So, talk to us more about that. Talk to us more. I want to know selfishly, how did it feel to put that 2 weeks in, and we'll get into some more stuff.
Well, it's still fresh, Sam. So I'm not gonna lie to you, man. A little bit nervous. No lie.
Yeah.
Like it's a cool feeling. It's something that's been on my heart for many months, and something I've prayed about, thought about, talked to family about, close friends, and and thankfully I have a lot of entrepreneurs that I'm able to talk to on a daily basis that have done this and understand kind of what you're going through, right? But when you officially give that notice, it's like, man, okay, what is life going to look like now? I got to create my own schedule. What does that look like? That being said, I think this was always the goal. When we talk about financial freedom, we talk about building wealth. It's hard to do massive wealth within a W 2. Not saying it's impossible, right? But those 40 hours of focus, right? If you're able to put that on a business and use those 40 hours on, something you're passionate about, imagine how big you can grow it. And that's what I kept reiterating in my head when I did give that 2 weeks notice. And for those that are listening, if you're thinking of doing something like that, highly recommend first having side hustles similar to Sam and I, where you're building up income and seeing if you like it. And so all along the way, I've been investing in real estate, right? I did the long-term rentals, I did the house hacks, I did the short-term rentals, and I found a passion in short-term rentals in Atlanta because I could get amazing houses, great neighborhood, and still make it cash flow. And so along the way last year, one thing that I did not depend on, because in my head I had, okay, I got my real estate license last year. I've been investing for 6 years before getting it. And so I'm able to use my investing knowledge to help clients get houses, and help investor clients specifically get houses. And so I was thinking, all right, it's going to take about 2 years probably to build up a pipeline of real estate clients to make it to where I could transition into that. That being said, because I had the short term rentals and I had to put in processes and different automations in place to make it less work for me so I could still do my W 2, other investors in the area that I was connected with realized what I was doing and started asking, like, hey, could you manage mine? And I said, sure, and started to grow that business. And long story short, today we manage 15, including my four. And
Wow.
now I have a team. I've got a guest experience manager. I've got a maintenance manager. I've got a turnover coordinator. And the whole team is pulling in a good amount and all incentivized to kind of continue growing this thing. And I think by the end of the year, we'll have 20. And so, long story short, I wasn't depending on that piece. And now, after seeing a couple months of the income from that, I realized, hey, if I'm able to focus on this in the realtor business, we could grow this to astronomical levels. Not to mention the deal that we're working on in Louisville, which is to develop 105 townhome units. This is something that we're putting a significant amount of money into, and we're going to be pulling together a lot of money as well from different friends, family, and things of that nature. And I realized I needed to focus. It was getting to a point where the W 2 was becoming a lot more demanding, as it should, right? It's Q2, or it's the second half of the year, behind the number, we got to catch up. So it was starting to become a lot more demanding and more travel required. And I would not be able to do both at a high level, which is needed. And so, yeah, I took the plunge, man. Monday, I gave him my 2 weeks. My last day is August 19th. And hey, we're going to go after this entrepreneurial thing full time and really see if these lessons are going to take hold. So, one thing I would ask is pray for me, and
Oh yeah, I got you, man. I got you.
and we're going to make it happen, man. I'm excited about it.
Definitely. Love it. Love it. And I what I appreciate about that particular part of your journey is, like, we saw the story. We just talked through it just now. And it was very deliberate, It was step by step, brick by brick. And what that means is that it's attainable, right? Like, anyone who's listening to this can achieve the same thing, but you got to understand, he sacrificed a lot. He house hacked 3 times. He's house hacking now. You sacrificed, you put the time in, you learned hard lessons along the way, you adapted, you took chances. You took a chance with Airbnb, and that's grown that particular business and then sparked a completely new business. Like, it was step by step. So I really want people to understand, this is not an overnight situation. It's not overnight. It's years of work and consistency to be able to get to the point where you have the option to dive into your business endeavors full time. So I really hope that people latch on to that.
Absolutely, Sam. I couldn't have said it better. It's a long-term game. If you want to win in the real estate game, you've got to have a long-term vision and you've got to stay consistent.
Definitely. Definitely. So, talk to us about this development project. I'm just thinking in my head, 6 years ago, triplex. Now the brother's talking about we're about to build 105 townhomes. Mind blowing. So, talk to us more about that project.
Man, so this is one where it's just all about networking, right? And kind of surrounding yourself with people that are in the business, and it doesn't matter what they're doing to help you. For example, right? My CPA is an investor. He's been investing in real estate this whole time I've known him. That was one of the requirements I needed. Now he's buying franchises. So I'm talking to him with the same vigor, like, hey man, how are you buying a coffee franchise? Like, how does that work? What does the deal look like? And the reason I like him is because he is looking at the tax code, trying to find ways that he can save and then able to use that for me. And we talked about it at the top. My realtor is an investor as well. She's been crushing it. She has gone on a stock like trajectory since I met her. And she actually lives in the neighborhood of where this land is located. It's out in Taylorsville, Kentucky. And it's across the street from one of the best middle schools and elementaries in the state of Kentucky. And so she brought this opportunity to me. She said, hey, this person's looking to sell their land. It could be an opportunity where we can build something. And I was like, okay, I'm not necessarily betting on the land or the opportunity. I'm really betting on you. That being said, over time, as we were going through our due diligence period and working to get this thing under contract, I started talking to my CPA, to some of my contractors. I started talking to my legal team and everybody that lives in that general area to ask them about them. They're all like, man, if you're able to do something like that, I want to get in. And I'm like, hold up. If they want to get in, there's got to be a real opportunity here. And then we started doing our due diligence on, hey, is there a rental demand? And when we started calling some of the apartments that are there that are all old, like 1980, 1990 apartments, there was wait lists. There was, hey, for the 3 bedrooms, it's a 15-person wait. We can get you on the wait list and maybe next year you could find a way in, right? For the 2 bedrooms, 10-person wait. And that's when it really solidified that, hey, this is a major opportunity. But taking it back to what you asked, Sam, it's from relationships. This was one that I wasn't actively looking for. She knew the type of character that I had. I know the type of character that she has. She came to me and said, hey, would you want to go 50-50 on this and GP and kind of pull in the funds? I said, absolutely. And so, yeah, we are about a week and a half away from closing on the land. Her and I are going to take down the land as well as the self-storage. There's going to be a little bit of self-storage on the back. We're going to split that piece evenly, and then we're going to go out to investors to pull in the rest that's needed for the townhomes.
Love it, love it. What's the timeline on something like that? So I know,
Oh
like,
man,
at least from fundraising to building, like, yeah, tell us more about that.
so the reason we wanted to take down the land and start the self-storage on our own is because if you want to move fast, move alone, right? So less people, you can move fast, but if you want to go far, go together. So the first piece, her and I can handle. We're going to get that started and have kind of the vision, have the architect draw it all up and show people what we're doing. And then that second piece is going to take a bit longer, right? It's going to take about 2 years to build all those townhomes. That being said, because we're not doing a full apartment building, we're doing townhomes and they all are similar. There's only going to be 2 designs there. You can do it in sections. And so we don't need to raise the full amount. We just need to raise enough for a section of 6. And then once you have 4 of those rented out or sold, now you keep 2 of them as model units and you start pre-leasing, pre-selling, similar to how you see in every city, right? And so that's kind of the game plan. But to have the full thing built out 2 years, but it's going to be done in phases, starting with the self-storage and then the first block of townhomes.
Wow, man, we're gonna have to have a part two of this once that development is up, and I'm just envisioning like a reality show coming out to Louisville and taping the build out of it. Man, that's incredible. That's incredible. Wow, wow, that's going to be really amazing, and I'm sure it'll help meet the demand that there is for housing out there and in that area. Um, wow. So that was a really dope interview, man. I just keep thinking. You mentioned just like growing up and having some challenges and seeing the family go through bankruptcy and just moving around and just some unstable times. And fast forward to getting placed in Kentucky, which you didn't even know was on where it was on the map, or Louisville, where you know was on the map. And you were able to, you were living in this dope loft and you just got turned on to real estate. You learned about house hacking. You started with house hacking and you have not looked back. And this is a super relatable story, a practical story, and something that I know listeners will get a whole lot out of. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing your story and so many gems in this episode.
No, Sam, I appreciate you. Thank you for putting on these episodes and encouraging other individuals that look like us to start out in this investing path, because there's not many, and it's encouraging to see you, myself, and others kind of taking that plunge, going down this journey and being successful in it. So I just appreciate you for providing the platform, and I appreciate you for continuing to get this message out that, hey, it's not rocket science. There's practical ways to get started and practical ways that can really change your life, not today, but 5 years down the road if you make those moves today.
Definitely appreciate that. And Niyi, can you tell the listeners more about your show, more about everything else that you have going on that they can tap into?
Absolutely. So if you want to check out our Instagram, it's at Ekabo Home, which is EKABO Home. And Ekabo is Yoruba for welcome. So it basically means welcome home. I actually host a podcast as well, and we're going to work hard on getting Sam on that podcast. And it's called...
Oh, I'm there.
Hey,
I'm there, man.
Hey, come on now.
consider it done. You don't have to. That's it. I'll be on.
Hey, y'all heard him live, bro. I need everybody to hold on to this. And the podcast is the Financial Freedom Mastermind podcast. We host every Wednesday at 7 p.m. is our recording. And I'm a realtor in Atlanta. I work mostly with people that are trying to do house hacks or invest in properties, because I can help them run the numbers. I can help determine neighborhoods. I've got contractor contacts, etc. And if you're looking for some more short-term rental help, I actually do consult on the side for short-term rentals as well. Again, just follow at Ekabo Home, and you can go ahead and click the link in the bio for all the links to everything else that we talked about.
Love it. Love it. Anything else that you want to leave with the listeners? Any last words of wisdom?
And from a last word, I would just say, get started as soon as you can, right? It's great to take in the information and get the knowledge, but without action, that knowledge is not worth anything. And so take this knowledge that you're getting from the podcast and go ahead and apply it and start taking action today.
Love it. Well, we appreciate you again for coming on the show, and appreciate everyone for listening to another episode of the Black Real Estate Dialogue podcast. Again, if you haven't already, take a moment, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to this. Also, leave us a 5-star rating and review. All of that takes less than 60 seconds, so you definitely can do it. And I look forward to hearing from you all soon. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Sam here from the Black Real Estate Dialogue. Make sure to hit that notification bell and that subscribe button, and to visit us at blackrealestatedialogue.com.